All right. So, hey everybody, we'll give everybody a minute or two to join today. Hello. All right. Shelly, would you give me an idea when it's a good time to start, please?
There are no more people waiting. You have 15 people, but it's just 11 right now. So you might want to wait a minute, just like
Sure.
another minute. And then that way to make sure if anyone ended late, they could, and I'll
Yep.
keep adding them in as you're going.
No, I appreciate it. I know the last session I was in was definitely going to be running a little late, and that's just the way it is with virtual presenting. But virtual presenting is the way to go. So at least it is for today. Hey friends, my name is Amy Hermon, and I'm an elementary school librarian from Michigan. I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but it's starting to thaw. It's in the mid-20s here. So anyway, I do want to get started. Please be sure to put in questions in the chat. I would be happy to answer questions as they come up. It makes this far more of a conversation than me just talking to my screen. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And my new friend Shelly is going to be making sure that I know about them when they are entered. So friends, I did put the bit.ly in the show description. So if at any time, it's also in the show notes. So friends, one of the reasons why I got started doing podcasting is because I found that school librarians tend to straddle this sort of dual identity. We are librarians by trade. We are and by training we are teachers. Most of us have been in the classroom for several years before we venture into the library. And so on the one hand, we've got one foot in the classroom, we've got a foot in the library, and trying to sort of make that all work, and realizing that we are the square peg in a round hole. Because every time, and this was for years, I was a school teacher for 10 years before I became a school librarian, and I always felt like I was a teacher first, and now as a librarian, I had to look at everything with my library eyes. And so I would be at staff meetings and they would be talking about things, but I always had to put it in the context of the library. So, they'd be talking and I'd say in the library. And that's because that's the way I now had to think as a school librarian. So I found that we sort of, being in this unique position as school librarians, call yourselves what you will. I know teacher librarian is very vogue, school librarian, I oftentimes just say I'm a librarian, but this idea of the square peg in a round hole, and we manage to make it work every day. And that is something which I have, that's just a way I think. And I took that idea of the square peg in a round hole, and I created a podcast which put us in the center of the conversation. If you at all listen to podcasts, there is a plethora of educational podcasts, and a large number of them have to do with educational technology, which is great, and a lot of them have to do with being an educator, and that's great. And I wanted to somehow find one that was solely dedicated to what we do and our craft. And I mean, it was a selfish thing. And I looked and I looked and I looked, and I didn't find anything. And as somebody who subsists on hours of podcasts, a diet of podcasts every day, not my own, but other people's podcasts, I found an opportunity to do something that I really feel is worthwhile. And today, I'm incredibly honored to be a part of this wonderful opportunity, invited to speak to this conference about the things that I have learned as a podcaster for the last 3 years. I've been interviewing school librarians for the last 2 years, and building podcast episodes around the contributions made by school librarians everywhere. I am going to be putting an episode out tonight, 114. And I'm very excited because I do have downloads in all 50 states and in 105 countries. So it's a lot of fun. I generated this to see the distribution of where those interviews were happening. I've done more than 70 and I've hit 23 states. And as a loyal person from Michigan, I definitely tap the talent in my own state, and I have from that point on ventured out to interview amazing library leaders around this country. I've also been very fortunate to do an interview in Canada, in the UK, and 3 in New Zealand. So it has been a wonderful sort of luxury to be able to meet other people with this opportunity. I have a podcast. I'd like to interview you, because I think if you just reached out to school librarians, it's kind of creepy to say, hey, let's talk about something that you love and I love, and it's being in the school library. And it's those kinds of conversations don't happen without some sort of platform, whether it's Twitter or it's Instagram, or in this case, Discord, or we are in Clubhouse, because it's not like you and I can step outside our doors and talk to the person on the left and the person on the right. If you recall back to when you were an educator, and for me, it was a while ago, um, as an educator, I could step outside my hall. I taught high school social studies for about 9 years. And I could talk to the person on either side of me. There were 7 of us in the hall who taught secondary social studies. And all of us had at one point taught the other person's classes. And we could support each other between classes, before school, after school. As school librarians, we don't have that opportunity. It's a rare thing to have 2 school librarians working in the same building, and it's kind of like that unicorn out there, that elusive 2 librarians in a single library. So what I wanted to do very much today is to share with you some of the things that I discovered about what school librarians around the country have and what we have in common, because there are so many things we can do to learn from one another. The fact that I got some great strategies from a California school librarian, or the fact that I found some great ideas coming out of Louisiana, where those ideas come from is less important than the fact that we have a place to share it. And that was one of the wonderful things about having a podcast. It's kind of like you have a bar, and the bar has a stage, and as the owner of the bar, you can invite anybody you want on the stage. And that's been my pleasure. That's been my honor. I see wonderful ideas and I reach out to people and I say, I'd love to work with you and put together an episode. So first and foremost, what have I learned from the listeners? Because quite honestly, right now, the listeners are driving the content. The podcast has taken some twists and turns, obviously with the pandemic, but the listeners have revealed so much to me about what is important to them that I wanted to share that with you, because I think there might be some head nodding after having done 70 interviews. The first and foremost, we're all just looking for community. It is so hard to do what we do every day. And at the end of the day, my husband said to me, why don't you, isn't there somebody else you can talk to about being a school librarian? And I don't think he realized that he was being kind of mean, but after 25 years, we've learned to look over some of our significant others' flaws. But, I have people in my life who are educators. I can call my sister and we can talk about our district and the things that it's doing and how we feel about it and how it impacts us. But at the end of the day, she's a middle school music teacher and I'm a school librarian. And as much as we can commiserate about things we have in common as educators in the same district, she will only barely understand, like sort of scratch the surface of what I go through on a daily basis. On the other hand, I have an episode with somebody we've never met. We're going to start talking, and all of a sudden we have this instant understanding. I understand where you're coming from. You understand where I'm coming from. And it's that source of support that I have only met a handful of the people I've interviewed in person. I'm very much hoping that AASL 21 happens, because this will be the first opportunity I have to be in the same space physically as some of the people I've interviewed. But we've created these kinds of connections having these episodes together. So, we have shared challenges. It doesn't matter if your library is a, over in New Jersey, or your library is over in Missouri or Indiana. We have very common things that, confound us on a daily basis, whether it is, an administration that has no idea what we do, or it is staff who've decided that they're going to dictate what their children check out on a daily basis, or that their kids have to read at level, or that we work with parents who would like to wield that sort of hand in their child selecting a book. Those kinds of things, it doesn't matter where we live. We can resolve a lot of those by developing strategies. So it's really been fun. In addition to sharing those challenges, problem solving. When we tackle new projects and things that we want to do, ultimately we hit roadblocks, and many of us have hit those roadblocks. So solving those problems, and more importantly, sharing how we solved our problems in our school library, is key. So when I interview somebody about the challenges they had when, somebody pushed back on titles in their collection, or that, again, like I said, you've got pushback from maybe the administration or families. How do we work through those things together? I love hearing people share their perspectives, and I'm really open to nuance. I have found myself, it's sometimes a little scary when you don't realize it's happening, but I have been so, like, the opportunity to grow in your own thinking. Perfect example right now. The internet, like library Twitter, is a very friendly place until the week coming up to Dr. Seuss's birthday. And if you're like, oh yeah, okay, so it really does bring out some very edgy ugliness in our group, which is usually a very friendly place to be. Library Twitter, I love you, but the week of Dr. Seuss's birthday, it's getting a little, like, the energy is kind of angry, if you know what I mean. So again, but we got to grow through that, right? And how are we going to do that? Having that talk through with somebody would be super. Resources. Here's another thing. The listeners get to me and they're like, you know what? I want resources. And here's where, our skills as curators is huge. Amanda Jones will tell you, we are the curators who are going to make work of taking all of the information that's out there and bringing it down to a manageable amount for our staff, for our students, for our families. And we've been doing that even before the pandemic hit. It became acutely, like, our skills as curators really got honed when the pandemic hit. So show notes are huge. So in the same way that you would go to a conference and you would, you're at a conference and you're gathering all of those resources and you're like, gosh, I cannot wait to get home so I can just sit down and start to really appreciate all the information that I've just been handed to me. I want to be able to digest it in a way that helps me. These resources are there in the show notes. It's really a great place to start for your new programming. When you want to do something that other people have done, sitting down and picking their brain is fantastic. Being able to scroll through those episodes and being like, yeah, I really wanted to try this. I'm going to listen to this episode. Because at the bottom of that episode are all those show notes. And you can pull up those resources. And you know what you can also do? All of the people I've interviewed have been like, Amy, please let your guests, please let your listeners know. I would love to field any of their questions. Most of my guests have been, enthusiastic about, this is how you can reach out to me. Please let your listeners know they can reach out to me. Let them be part of my PLN. Let's learn from each other. So that's huge. All right. So this question, you would think, so this question does not evoke the same sort of feelings in people. And I sort of, it can be a little awkward. Sometimes it does come out of the blue because I find somebody who really interests me and I say, hey, would you like to be on my podcast? It's kind of like asking somebody out on a first date. And it's kind of a big ask, but I'm going to share with you some of the responses I've gotten. And this is very common. it's rare. I do sometimes just get like an enthusiastic yes, I want to be on your podcast, but by and large, most people I approach about doing an episode have some initial pushback, and the reason why is this idea that somehow what you do on a daily basis isn't exceptional, and somehow you don't, merit this time on the podcast because you haven't done any number of things, including presented at a conference. Presenting at a conference, it's a great way to sort of, work through some of that, some of those thoughts that we have, and sort of share out with the world what we do. But let's keep in mind, it's a little different when you're doing a podcast. A lot of people push back because they say, you know what, I really haven't written anything. I'm not, I'm not published at all. You know, I don't do this kind of thing. You're like, no, of course we don't do this kind of thing. You're a librarian. I'm a librarian. Every day I get up, I go to work. I'm an elementary librarian all day. I get home around 4, and now I get to be a podcaster. Nobody needs a PhD to be a guest on this podcast. I have actually interviewed people with PhDs, and it's great and it's inspiring. And you get these amazing people who work at the collegiate level, and they're leading our library leaders. But I will never get a PhD. And I was informed this by the person I love, my partner in crime of 25 years, because we have 3 children in college. So pursuing a PhD is not in the cards for me. I also couldn't stand an hour of stats. And I've been told that there's statistics in getting a PhD, so that's never going to happen. I've never been a school librarian of the year, and I've never been a teacher of the year. And I know people who have, and I love interviewing them because they've been recognized for all these amazing programs they do. But that isn't me. I've never been recognized for anything I do. So, all right. Another big one. Yes, question.
They want to know if you've ever interviewed any classified library clerks or technicians.
I do. You know what? My interview tonight, she is a library manager. She is a library manager, and I do have some folks who say, oh, I have a library certificate. I've never been a teacher. So I do. And my guest tonight does not have a degree in library. She is the library manager in New Zealand. She is also the president of her library association. So absolutely, I do. And yes, I think I would, to respond even to a bigger question, my audience comprises of students considering going into library students, people who are doing their pre-service or their practicum, people who are rookies, people who are veterans. I every once in a while I get parents who are volunteers in the space that is their child's library, and there is no librarian. So I've actually heard from parents who are trying to run a library because their school doesn't have a librarian. And you can have all your feelings about that, but what this parent has done is tried to fill a gap that is not being addressed by the administration. And they're listening to my podcast as a way to do that. So I do interview, sometimes it's called a clerk or it's called a para. A friend of mine who did the episode called, it was on circulation, boosting circulation. She has been a library assistant for 7 years, and right now runs a library that used to be a room filled with dust. And she started it and opened it. Her name is Chelsea. And but boosting circulation, absolutely. I interviewed a para or a library clerk who has no formal training in library school. Absolutely. I love to learn from everybody because, and what I'll say here is, experience is where you become the expert. You don't become the expert because you go to school. You become an expert in aspects of being a librarian because you work it every day, you live it every day. So some of the more common sort of protestations I hear is, I'm not an expert. So I quickly drop the word expert. Like when I say to people, hey, you have this expertise in X, you have this expertise in Y, that's when the pushback happens. Oh, I'm not an expert. I love the next one. You should interview my friend. And I get that one a lot. And it leads to really cool things. I will say we have excellent taste when it comes to respecting fellow school librarians. And I use that word school librarians because it I don't want it to be considered an umbrella term. It is what my podcast is called, but I certainly never have ever wanted to ever exclude anybody. And I know that listeners will understand I speak from the place where I am right now. But it has been, I've interviewed people who have been on, this is their first year. This is their first year, and it was the pandemic. Like, okay. So, again, we have so much to learn from one another. And the wonderful thing is you don't have to, write a proposal and present at your state conference. You can have this conversation with me on Friday and we'll talk about it. Okay. So I've learned a lot of things about school librarians. Some of these I'm like, oh, I could have told you that already, because I know we're very opportunistic people. We're incredibly opportunistic. We tend to take a jump or a risk when a lot of people would be much happier staying exactly where they are. I hear this a lot from people I interview. I jumped at the chance to do this, even though I had some concerns, even though I knew, like, especially when it comes to librarians saying, hey, I'm a high school teacher, but I have the opportunity to teach in elementary. Do you think, what do you think? I was like, absolutely, you should do it. So many of us have found things because we have taken those risks, whether it is presenting, whether it is writing, whether it is, doing something like a podcast interview. We are incredibly thoughtful when it comes to planning. And that's one of the reasons why, it's after all this training of doing these school presentations and doing school-wide activities, we've had to be very detail oriented. Most of my guests will tell me I overthink everything. I'm like, oh, good, because so do I. I'm a type A personality. I've met one of my interviews said he was broadcasting from the library. And Duncan said, I'm a type B personality. I'm like, really? Do tell. So at school, we are, and we have learned we all have to become essential. I don't care how secure you feel in your job. I worry every year. I worry every year about my job. And as a result, we've had to become essential in our school communities. And not only are we incredibly generous with what we, the resources we have, but with our time, we have a knack for dropping everything we're doing and making somebody else's problem our priority. I call it the stop, drop, and fix. And we tend to do that because we recognize that our value to our building is that we support everybody. Somebody once said, oh, do you have an elevator pitch for what you do? I said, yeah, support everyone. 2 words. That's it. Support everyone. I don't care if you are the superintendent who walks in the building that day. It's not going to happen. But, or my principal walks in the room that day, or if it's a teacher, or if it's a parent, or if it's a kid, all of a sudden I just drop everything and we got to go fix it. And that's, you're like that too, and we all are. When people come to you with something, you sit there and go, is this what I went to school for? Or really? And yet you've learned how to become that person because people come to you to fix their problems. I've heard librarians tell me, people don't really care that I'm a librarian. They just care that I know how to fix their computer. And you're like, okay, there was a time people didn't care what I did, but did I have some more white paper behind my desk because the computer, the printer was out of white paper. So we've learned how to be the person our buildings need us to be. We are amazing collaborators. I love collaborating with librarians, with our people, because it's like a dream team, because we have so much that we are thinking about without even saying it, that I know that if we work together on an episode, we're going to do an amazing job because we're going to be thorough and detailed. There's fact checking. Nobody's going to be throwing around things that shouldn't be there. And that's really, at the end of the day, makes for a really great, podcast episode. We're yes people. At the end of the day, most people I ask say yes. They don't all say yes, but most do. Okay, as I said before, expertise comes from experience. As much as I would love to go back to library school, as much as I'd love to get a PhD, I'm going to have to be happy with learning from the school librarians in this country. And so my education for the past 3 years has been learning from the people with whom I collaborate. And that has made me a very, I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's shaped who I am. I incorporate so much of what I learn in these interviews into my daily practice. Do I have to incorporate it all? No, but it certainly does give me a lot of perspective and help me do my job better every day. All right, so I started to break down some of my episodes down by what we are. So at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, we all started off as teachers. We're sort of teachers. And so what we teach has a lot of, this is where being in the library does, we can promote the things that, like digital citizenship, like media literacy. We can teach the kinds of things that may or may not get taught in the classrooms: plagiarism, oversharing, internet safety. All of these things we can make, prioritize when we see our students. And so at the end of the day, we are teachers. We do have that expectation of what we do with our students. I love the things that make us special. I love the things that make us special. And as a school librarian, there are some things that set us apart from being educators in the rest of the room, or in the rest of the building. Like, what we have in our libraries is so unlike any classroom, or the gym, or the art, or the music room. We have an absolute, I go through this idea, we're the resource, the person in the room, or people in the room. We are resources, our space is a resource, and our collection is a resource. And in that respect, it really does set us apart from the other educators in our building. Again, it's hard because there's only one of us. You might be in a building where there's 20 or 30 or even 40 teachers. There's still only one, maybe two. I mean, if you are lucky enough to work with another person in your library, that's fantastic. I talk to some people who are like, nope, it's just me. That was me for 7 years. It was just me. Sometimes a parent volunteer, sometimes student volunteers, and student volunteers. That's, a real fantastic dynamic. I have loved learning about how student assistants have really shaped library programming. And that's a really fun thing to learn about when we look at our programming and see how much of it is because students have had a voice in what we do, what we offer to them. So, and I absolutely love doing a deep dive into what makes this different. There's a sub in the library, God help you. I selfishly did that episode by myself because I had enough nightmare stories to fill an episode. It rarely turns out well. Occupational hazards, again, it's just, what we do comes with unique challenges, and I had so much fun. Just it's sort of a love story to what we do. Yes, being in the library can create havoc. So I had a lot of fun. District librarians, it's like, there are a lot of great things about being a district librarian. I certainly didn't think that at the beginning of the conversation. Okay. All right. So this was my drinking game this past year, when every time my district told me we were going to pivot, because it happens every 3 weeks. Next week is we're starting back full face, full attendance. It's terrifying. So starting in April of 2020, I say we because the attention was turning towards teaching remotely. The attention was being shifted towards how can we support one another in this brave new world. And, the pandemic reduced us all to first-year librarians. And I don't want anybody to feel like this is my 14th year. Oh, it was the great equalizer. back in March, I felt like I was scrambling. It was not pretty. And yet we all sort of tackled this idea of teaching remotely, distance learning. And then as this school year started, some of us are in the classrooms. Some of us are teaching off of carts. There's hallway checkout, there's curbside checkout. And how we sort of navigate these sort of treacherous waters right now. I know not everybody has been fortunate enough to get vaccinated. I live in the state of Michigan, where our governor has made it an absolute priority to vaccinate the school librarians. Excuse me, to vaccinate the educators. So that's it's a very difficult thing to consider, because right now we're all so worried about being that person who spreads this virus. I work in 3 buildings. I usually work in 4. I see upwards of 500 or 600 students every week, and I know that a lot of you are in the same boat. So we were able to shift gears, and again, putting these episodes out every week. The fun thing is we didn't have to wait until the end of, or wait until our state conference to be able to have these conversations, to be able to share out these conversations. I mentioned programming. I love learning from other people, and I don't want to say I'm a coward, but I tread very carefully into unknown waters. But I'll tell you what has really truly helped is being able to learn from others as they've learned what they're going to do. And the nice thing is I've learned that school librarians are happy to share the mistakes they made to get to where they are. And that's something that I have had to embrace as the host of this podcast, because I make plenty of mistakes, and we have to evolve in our thinking, because we are lifelong learners. But this has been, sharing out programming has been really exciting, because it really does give us an opportunity to learn from one another and get great ideas, because you may not take all of these, but you might pick one of these ideas to say, that's something I'm looking forward to implementing, maybe not this week or this month, but maybe next year. All right. I feel so incredibly fortunate to be able to support every single student in our building. It is a privilege. It is an honor. It is something that is rather awesome. I mean, in like how big it is and how it sort of affects you. But this idea that we sort of work with our students through this continuum of them growing and growing as readers and growing as young people, and being a constant for them is such an honor. And so I am, and obviously I don't have many of these episodes, and I'm working towards putting more kinds of these episodes out there, because I feel we have so much we have the potential to have such a positive impact on our student and our school community. Where do we fit? This is something that I've really tried to tackle with, because I think for so many of us, we say, oh, the library is the hub of the building. And you're like, well, not if your building was built in 1936, because my buildings were built in the 1930s. And we are nowhere near the center of the library. We are or the center of the school. We're kind of like an afterthought. They put us in the 3rd floor. Like, I think it might have been glorified storage. Where my library is right now used to be the gym. And that's because my building didn't have an elevator for the first 20 or 30 years. But, the idea is, where does your library programming fit into your community? You may not be able to change where it physically fits into the school community, but how do you not just promote your programming out to the school, but how do you support the school's priorities? And the building priorities, the district priorities, and those are, that's where I was going with that. I have, a wonderful opportunity to interview people who have been recognized for their leadership in our profession. I am always in awe. And there's a lot of fangirling going on. I do like to interview people who are at the collegiate level as well, because they are the ones who are preparing the next batch of people who will be in our school libraries and learning more about that pre-service training and the things that our up and coming school librarians are learning along the way, and learning about their practicum and learning about the preparation that goes into that. It's really been a lot of fun. But I have had some fantastic opportunities to meet with people, and I use the podcast as an excuse. I'm like, hey, I have a podcast. I'd love to bring you in and we could have a conversation. All right. Always be advocating. My Amanda Jones says it's not bragging, it's advocating. So absolutely, it is advocating. We have to be loud and proud about what we do, and it's hard because I think I was raised by sort of one of those Midwestern Protestant mothers who always discouraged you from bragging. It's not polite to brag. It's rude. It makes your friends resentful. Don't brag. Don't brag. And people won't like you if you brag. And you're like, you know what? That's garbage. Because at the end of the day, my job's on the line. My library space is on the line. My program is on the line. So we've got something bigger than just my job. I used to think, now you notice, the first episode I did was on self-advocacy because I'm worried I'm going to be gone. And then we sort of have to move beyond our immediate needs of I'm worried about my job to I'm worried about my space. I'm worried about my collection. I'm worried about my budget. I'm worried about my rooms because my libraries tend to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And the first thing they take away is my office. And then the next thing they take away is that corner over there where we used to have the computers, because now that we have, a one-to-one school, we don't need computer labs. We don't need computer space in your library. So Amy, obviously we can just take that away and we'll find another way. Oh, we'll just repurpose it. We'll put a divider in there and that's where we'll put the speech teacher. So understand this is more than just protecting our jobs. It's about protecting our collections and our spaces as well. I think we have to talk more about our core values as school librarians. And I love picking the brains of anybody who wants to talk about what our attitudes are towards different aspects in our library. Because again, as educators, we can have opinions about being an educator, but how these pertain to our space, how these pertain to our collection, how they pertain to things like book checkout. We have to think about what our responses are going to be when a student comes to us with a question. When a student comes to us and says, Mrs. Hermon, I want an LMNOP book. And I said, I don't know what an LMNOP is. And they're like, Mrs. Hermon, L or an M. And she was talking about the bins in her teacher's room. She was allowed to go to the L bin or the M bin or the N bin. I was like, oh, you dear sweet girl, we don't do that here. I've had to explain that to students and they look around like, are you sure? I'm like, no, quite sure. We don't have L, M, or N books, but we have books you'll love. Let's go see what you want to read. So I love exploring. I really could do this for a long time. There are some bucket list things and I love learning from people who've done some fantastic, okay, seriously, so jealous, but learning from people who've done things I would love to do in my life. And this was really fun. So again, going back to this idea of being problem solvers, collaboration has always been part of our responsibility, but what it looks like for you versus somebody else is going to be really different. All right, social media. All right, you have an opportunity tomorrow to learn from my friend Amanda Jones and her social media to showcase your library program. She's amazing, and it's how she and I met. Free money. I don't know anybody who's ever said, I have all the money I need. I have so much money, I don't know what to do with it. Yeah, that's never a problem. Again, Amanda Jones, free money and how to stretch your budget. And then, finally, being a jack of all trades and going back to this idea that we have to be what other people need us to be. I could go on and on and on about our collection. And you'll notice in some cases, like here, weeding and then extreme weeding. All right, I looked at, trying to take it to another level. And, here are some places where we really could revisit this because I really feel like I have so much space to learn. Being that, speaking of which, lifelong learners, lifelong learners. And, it's really, I sort of have this realization. On one hand, there are days I feel so capable. I'm on my A game. I feel great. It's usually because there's hot coffee in the room. And then there are those days where I'm just like off, and I just feel like I'm striking out every time because I'm not feeling capable about my job, and vacillating between feeling like I know a lot and realizing I have so much more to learn. All right. Again, finding nuance. I want to tackle a lot of topics and have people change my mind. All right, Wikipedia and using Wikipedia wisely is a really good example of how I was a staunch, a hatred of Wikipedia beyond words, and yet one conversation in one episode, I can now. It's like my eyes are open. And it was an amazing opportunity to meet with somebody and say, yeah, I'll change your mind. I was like, oh, thank you. And I love having that opportunity, and it really does help us become better as professionals. I guess what I'm saying here, consider it. Okay, consider um, tackling a topic and having an episode. My first season is season one. These are all fair game because I did those all by myself. I mean, if you can imagine myself talking to me, but I got on my soapbox occasionally. And I really would invite somebody to come and really open my eyes to see how I can do better, because that's what it is all about. Season 2 and season 3, these are, I mean, to sum up, deep dives into a topic. Anytime you think of something, and this goes back to before I had a podcast, I would find myself in my driveway talking to myself about something that bothered me at work. Nobody cares. I know that my sister's not going to understand. My husband really doesn't want to hear about the library. And my children are in the car going, Mom, we can hear you. I was like, okay, but this is really bugging me. And so a lot of what I like to do is to go deep into a topic with other school librarians who totally get it. And another idea, anytime there's something that you would share with your department or your PLN, or as we're learning now, it's a PLF, or your state conference, because, these are the kinds of things that are worth sharing with a lot of people. All right, so if you've never recorded a podcast episode, all right, first of all, and this is the best part, you're the expert. You're the expert. It's hard recognizing that I'm not going to be the expert in the conversation, but I've kind of gotten over it. Like I got over it 70 conversations ago. I'm okay with not being articulate about a topic. I'm fine having opinions, but really it's where I learn. You don't have to go through a committee. There's no rubric, there's no proposal, and there's no wait. All right, you don't have to ask your district if you can go to this conference. You also don't have to worry about them. We have a disclaimer in the intro, and 114 episodes later, I'm telling you, it is a safe space to have a conversation. We have that disclaimer in the intro for a reason, and it really does. I mean, this is the my tweets are my own sort of equivalent. You don't have to make sub lesson plans. You don't have to get a sub, and there are no expenses involved. You don't, when we do an episode together, you don't go anywhere, and you don't have to have a hotel. It's been socially distanced from the start. It is low tech, like low tech. You need some earbuds, like the free ones we used to get with the earlier iPhones. The earlier iPhones, those were great, little earbuds, and they plugged into your device. Those were fantastic. I'm moving on to like a link. I've been using Skype, and I've heard that Skype is going to not be supported anymore with my recording software. So we'll be using something else. I never record the video. The video is for the benefit of us to have this conversation. So we can see each other. We're not going to cut each other off. Super casual. When I say COVID casual, I'm just saying like in your athleisure wear, you always get the questions in advance. And we are usually drinking something. Not like Drunk Librarian, because there is a podcast called Drunk Librarians, and that's not us. But because we're always recording at night or after school, an adult beverage is not only welcomed, it is, I will join you in that adult beverage. And it's a super niche audience like this one. Like we're talking to people who love being in the library. And so when you have these conversations, the people listening to them are going, yep, I get it. I get it. All right. I just wanted to show you, this is very typical of what an episode looks like before it gets published. What I have cut out are how many times I have to start over again, how many times there's a cough or a sneeze. One of my guests inhaled a bug. She was recording outside, true story. She was recording outside because the kids are being noisy, and she inhaled a bug and for 10 minutes was coughing up a bug. But we kept on going. We edited it out. You never knew because we edited it out. Dog barking, when the doors slam, kids, and then the swear words. I swear like a sailor, especially when I'm not in school. I mean, always when I'm not in school. But yeah, that never makes it into the podcast. Okay. The last time I gave a presentation to real people like you was March 12th. Now, March 12th is the day before the day that will, changes everything. That becomes this is the before times, March 12th, but everything was crashing down on March 12th. I gave a presentation to a room of 7 people. This was a presentation that I had proposed 8 months before. This was a presentation I found out about like 6 months before, and honestly started working on that presentation as soon as I got that approval. I had to lock in hotel. I had to lock in travel expenses. I had to lock in, all sorts of things, sub-lesson plans for 3 days. It was crazy. And I gave my presentation on the 12th of March to 7 people. And I was distracted. The world was distracted. My audience of 7 were distracted. By the time I left, the expo center had emptied and the line to check out of the hotel was, I don't know, a city block long. It was crazy. And I was disappointed. I was sad. And I went home, and then they closed schools on the 13th. I did that presentation as a podcast episode 4 days later. And instead of having 7 people listen to it, I have had 1,500 downloads. I've had people from all 50 states listen to that episode and 29 countries. And that was like huge. I want to brag about one of my guests. She's amazing. Please follow her, Library Lou, on Twitter. She's in Georgia. And she and I connected at first. We were on our PLN because she had said, guess what, you guys? I'm presenting not 1, but 2 sessions at ISTE in Anaheim. And she was over the moon, as you can imagine. Like anybody, be like, oh my God, I'm presenting 2 sessions at ISTE. And within a week or 2 or 3, she reached out to me. I said, I want to do, let's do these how about you do these presentations as like a warm up as an episode? And she's like, yeah. And then she messaged me like a little bit later and said, you're not going to believe this, but I'm not going to ISTE. They postponed it. They kicked it down the road. They postponed it till November. I was like, dude. She goes, well, I don't think you want to have me on your podcast anymore. I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? You could not be more wrong. I want you now more. You can do your presentations on the podcast. And I know that doesn't make up for this, but it's something because you've worked so hard and turned it around in a week. In a week, we had recorded Minecraft Badges and More, episode 73. And the next week we recorded episode 74, Skype in the Library. The last time I checked, she had 2,600 downloads, all 50 states, and 33 countries had listened to her presentation. Now, you would have never gotten that at ISTE. I'm sorry, no shade on ISTE. ISTE's fantastic. Like ISTE's like, again, like my bucket list. I'd love to go to ISTE. It'd be so fantastic. But you know what? Like, it didn't happen, but we still made it happen. It's really awesome. All right, friends. This slide, I stole an idea from Amanda Jones. If you would like, you can at some point share your information on social media and stay connected. I invite you to do that at any time during the conference. I have written about my experiences being a podcaster. I was published in, and here's an article I published for school catalogs, information service. This is an Australian publication. And then I was featured last month in an interview called Next in Ed, all about my story about being a podcast. I do have frequently asked questions because it does come up, and I sort of compile those in a list. And, you know, friends, it has been the life altering to say the least, but this podcast has been 3 years of my life. And I have met some of the most amazing people, and I will never be the same. So, Sarah, I'm sorry, excuse me, Shelley, so sorry. Are there any more questions? I know we have to like log off in a minute.
Nope, there were no more questions. I did just put your bit.ly in again. Oh, are your podcasts available on the alternative format for non-Apple?
Oh, they're anywhere you get your podcasts. So if you, wherever you get your podcast that you listen to, absolutely. Absolutely. If you go into your podcatcher on your smart device, you can also just Google School Librarians United, Amy Hermon, and you can play it right on your computer. But it is available anywhere you get your podcast. There are approximately 100 podcatchers out there that will aggregate the podcasts. So, you know, if you download a podcatching app on your, in this case, a smartphone, doesn't matter if it's iOS or if it's an Android, all you do is look up school librarians. It usually comes up right away.
And then is your podcast on YouTube?
You know what? I am so grateful. This is not a visual medium. I have, as I've told people, I have a face for podcasting. I do not embrace that. I appreciate it doesn't need to be an actual visual medium. You can actually just upload the recordings. I've thought about it. I have. It would be a great undertaking. Right now, I have not explored YouTube. It would be, because I don't record the video of our conversations, it would still just be a recording of the episode, not a video.
Well, they keep saying they can't wait to listen.
Oh, yay! All right, well, listen, friends, listen, please do, and reach out, because I you know, people tell me they've, you know, people say, you know, being on the podcast is a little scary, but as soon as it's over, you want to do another episode. And so the record is I've had someone return 4 times. So I would love to meet some of you and broadcast some of the ideas you'd like to share around the world. Thank you so much.